Congress wants to know whether or not driver pay could improve highway safety and keep drivers in seats. Simple as that. So, yeah.
Simple. Sure. Sounds simple. However, Tyson's been digging into this report, and let's just say he's got some thoughts. So let's bring him in now. Tyson, good to see you.
Hey, man, thanks for bringing me in.
We're gonna let you loose here in just a moment here, because I know you got quite. Yeah, well, we're gonna see. Let's start. I just want to talk really about this report and what the study was supposed to determine. Let's start there before we get into what it did not determine.
Sure. So the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed just a few years ago, it directed FMCSA to conduct a study of the impacts of various methods of driver compensation on safety and driver retention, including hourly pay and detention time pay. So in other words, Congress wants to know whether or not driver pay could improve highway safety and keep drivers in seats. Simple as that. So, yeah.
Simple. Sure. Sounds simple. However, as you pointed out in your conversation with Jason Miller, the conclusion that they came to was unsatisfying, and I think that's probably an understatement here, because there was no conclusion to the bigger questions in all of this.
Yeah, their conclusion, you're right, it's basically inconclusive is what they came down to. So, here's the quote of their conclusion, which is, the available data and empirical research are insufficient to determine whether driving, working conditions, and compensation methods affect driving behavior and safety performance of drivers. So basically, we don't know is basically the response here. And there's two reasons. They gave us two reasons as to how they came to the conclusion or why. The first one is the driver pay data is proprietary in nature, and therefore carriers did not provide researchers with that information. The second reason is that there was nothing that researchers can compare. So in other words, pretty much all long-haul truck drivers are paid a piecemeal model, so per mile, per load, right?
Yep.
No one is paying them by the hour, so there's no way to compare real-world data because everything is the same. So those are the reasons. That's the explanation that we got as to why they gave us pretty much an answer of inconclusive. Yeah.
As you know very well, and I think most people know, any piece of research depends on, obviously, the data. But at the same time, there are different ways to look at data, and good researchers will sift through it and make an objective determination based on what they found. There's also bad research out there where they take the data and they kind of, mold it the way that they want to, tell the narrative here. In this particular case, it does not seem like we can blame researchers for the lack of a satisfying answer. You make this point in a blog piece on the website, laneline.media, and you blame the carriers. And I think based on what we know from the study, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the entire point of the study is to look into driver pay and safety and retention. The carriers apparently refused or just didn't give over the single most important piece of information of a driver pay study, which is driver pay.
Yeah. What a novel concept.
Yeah, right. So what are researchers supposed to do? It's like doing research on climate change, but not having access to temperature data. What am I supposed to do at this point? So their hands were tied, and that's why. Yeah.
Which, I mean, this begs a lot of questions. The big one, I think, off the top, as we kind of unravel this spool of yarn or whatever it is, why aren't the carriers providing this information? Why is it, quote unquote, proprietary? Asking that question, we're left to kind of jump to our own conclusions here, and I'm sure you've made that leap as well.
Yeah, so again, the official reason as to why we don't have this information is because it's proprietary. They don't want other people to know about it. Listen, there are ways to give researchers data without making it visible to anyone else. It's a thing that can be done. So that being said, my guess, and it's just a guess, is that carriers know that driver pay absolutely is tied to safety and driver retention. And then giving that data to researchers, it would reveal exactly that. Consequently, that would contradict their whole driver shortage narrative that's been going on. We can talk about that in a little bit too.
Yeah.
But what is interesting is that this study was ordered by Congress in the section of the infrastructure bill establishing the under 21 pilot program. So, carriers have been calling for 18 to 20-year-olds to drive interstate as a way to address that so-called driver shortage. And so the question that I have is then, why did Congress ask for a study on driver pay and retention in the same breath of that under 21 pilot program? And so it's probably because they want to know if simply improving driver pay would deem an under 21 interstate drivers unnecessary. So it's kind of like two birds, one stone. It's like, we'll give you this pilot program, but we also want to know if this driver shortage you're talking about can be addressed in different ways, in more appropriate ways, such as driver pay. And so that's kind of where we're stuck right now.
Yeah, when we look at the whole issue of driver pay, it is a pay-by-the-mile system. You talked about the complications that raises with regard to this conversation because there is so much variance out there. And we've talked about the pay-by-the-mile system before and the problems that it poses within the industry on everything for the most part in terms of compensation. What this does to me, this particular report, considering we don't know for a number of reasons, but we don't know the impact that pay is having on safety and retention, it does make a compelling argument, I suppose, in a way, to switch to, an hourly pay system, or at least look at the pay-by-the-mile system and make some adjustments. I don't know if that's something we can take away from this and maybe build off of, or...
So here's the thing. So you would think that, this hourly pay can be something that you can go to as an alternative method. And I talked to Dr. Miller about that, and he kind of explained to me as to why we do not have an hourly pay system. And, he gave me explanations such as, cash inflow and outflow factors. Also there's historical precedent, and that modern day technology didn't exist where you could track a driver's time. And so, back in the day, it just made more sense to do like a per mile per load since you couldn't track that time, and we just kind of maintained that status quo since then. But I suggested that maybe it's as simple as hourly pay will increase labor costs, driver pay for carriers, because they would be forced to finally pay drivers fairly for all time worked. But the fact that nobody is offering hourly pay, it suggests, and this is for long-haul drivers, it suggests that doing so would essentially be a fatal error to the carriers in terms of competition, because it would just drive up costs for them. And so this has more to do with the operational cost than it has anything to do with paying, their workers their fair share. And so there's a lot of technical reasons. The only problem is we can't prove that fact, or that idea that, this is all about, increasing, labor costs. We just don't have that data because that data is being more or less suppressed in the name of proprietary, information.
Speaking of that proprietary information, you mentioned the driver shortage narrative earlier. I'm going to lob this one up for you. Yep. You can take a big swing. But the report that we do have here, it does put a dent, I think, in that narrative that has a lot of dents in it by this point. But kind of talk about that. Again, I'm lobbing this one up for you. Sure. Take a big swing.
I mean, you say big dent. I think it destroys this narrative. I mean, again, this isn't the first time, I think it was 2019. Several years ago, the Department of Labor put their 2 cents on this driver shortage and said that, economics doesn't make sense on this. Look, this final report is the consensus of numerous researchers and academics, not just one or two, numerous, who found the driver shortage myth to be exactly that. It's a myth. And for example, whenever demand for labor increases, so do wages. So would wages as a way to attract more. This is just basic fundamental economics. There's not, take one economics 101 class, you can wrap your mind around this. This isn't deep in the weeds of economics. And so, in fact, look at spot rates, for example. Spot rates have hit a floor, and they've stayed there since 2022. And that's because there are too many drivers. Not that there's not enough. It's because there's too many drivers. And this report shows all sorts of charts kind of indicating that, like, look at driver pay and look how look at all of the available data. Nothing points to a driver shortage. And then a lot of times there's too many drivers. Like right now, we're seeing a bit of a glut, Yeah. And we've seen that, in the past 10, 20 years, it ebbs and flows just with the markets, just like with everything else. And so, it's very weird to see this driver shortage narrative. Here's the thing. No one outside, I think at this point, no one outside of the American Trucking Associations and their members believe in this driver shortage. I think at this point, it's just common knowledge. It does not exist. And the thing is, I'm convinced that they don't believe it either. Mm-hmm. I don't think they believe in a driver shortage. Rather, I think that it's just pure propaganda in an effort to compel policies and legislation that will drive down labor costs. Yeah. In other words, driver pay. Think about it. Under 21 drivers, they want that in the name of a driver shortage, but it's just going to drive down costs. They also want to increase size of weights of tractor trailers in the name of a driver shortage. Again, it would just drive down. It would chase out smaller businesses. So this whole thing of the driver shortage, basically, it's just a way to compel policies that has nothing to do with the shortage. It has something to do with keeping down costs for the larger carriers.
Yeah, consider the source in not just this, but everything as well. I do want to touch on one other thing here because this report did interview drivers, right? And you flagged a few interesting responses that I think are worth noting here.
Right. So in the absence of actual data, they did interview dozens of truck drivers at truck stops to kind of get a sense of what the men and women behind the wheel, what they are experiencing. And it's exactly what you think it would be, which is they're saying that basically, yes, hourly pay would be great, and not having hourly pay, this per mile, this per load pay method we have, it incentivizes them to basically drive dangerously at times.
Go.
It's basically, So here's one quote, which is, if you're hourly, you can focus on safety first. If you're paid by the mile, your natural instinct is to focus on how quickly you can get it done, because that's when you make your money over safety. If someone says a big portion of driver turnover is we're not incentivized to be safe with paid per mile. So the faster you go, the better you are off money wise. And so again, we don't have the data. The data is being suppressed that would prove this, that would quantify this, that would show this to us. But the men and women down on the wheel, they know what is to be true. Everybody knows what's to be true. We're seeing it in real time that, if they got paid by the hour, they could take their time, they could be safe. But the current model is, as you pointed out, just go.
I think that's a great point, though. As we can kind of close on this, we don't have the data because it's being withheld. Yeah. But everybody who does this day in and day out, and it makes logical sense when you think about it, right? If you're not forcing people to rush, that's going to help with safety. Yeah. As we talked about before with our colleague Mark Schrimmer, that's going to help with detention time.
Sure.
It's going to help with a number of other things down the road. And that's what this report we hoped was maybe going to tell us. And in a way, it kind of did, even though it didn't.
Sure.
But it would have been nice to have that information.
It would have been, and this study also calls for more studies. So there's hey, I know.
Wow, shocking.
Yeah, which is a little disappointing. But I guess the thing we can learn here from is that we need more information. But in the meantime, we just have the word of the men and women behind the wheel.
Tyson, we'll leave it there. We appreciate your time, and everybody can check out your piece on landline.media. Thank you.
Yeah.